Hi everybody, this is Phil Haloka from Complete Captive Management Services, and today we wrap up the three-part series on the captive audit with a conversation about the important attributes of an audit. So I grappled with how to best lay this out. So I figured, why don't I just share the story of what I would do as the captive manager when I get my hands on a group captive financial audit. So I did that. So three things I gravitate towards whenever I get my hands on an audit. The first one is the independent auditor's report. You've heard me say this time and time again. This is the most important section that a user of a financial audit should look at. Who's it issued to? Okay, sometimes the audit may be issued to the captive manager. And what that suggests is the captive manager is the one engaging the auditor to complete the financial audit. That's neither good or bad. It's just an indicator of who is the primary user of the audit. Okay? In this case, who it's issued to is the primary user. The opinion, we've talked about this before. There are 4 opinions. The only 2 I care about are non-qualified or qualified auditor's opinion. In the auditor's report, I will flip to the section where it says opinion. If there is any opinion other than non-qualified or qualified, I set the audit aside and I read no further. There's no need to. Stay away. The third thing that I look at is the financial audit issue date. Now, I'm a big planner. I don't like to rush a product for any reason. And as you know, June 30th is the common regulator submission requirement date. So if the audit is stamped June 30th, there's a likely suspicion that that audit was thrown together because it needs to submit it by the required submission date. If it's submitted or stamped June 15th, I like that better than June 30th. But that's my opinion. Doesn't necessarily have to be yours. Okay, I read through the independent auditor's report. I then jump to the financials, which is the next section. The first financial is the balance sheet, and you want to make sure it's comparative, meaning you want to see 2 columns of financial values within a balance sheet, say for 2020 and 2021. That's comparative. So then my eyes will gravitate towards the asset section, and I want to see, have assets increased from last year? Check. Liabilities, have they decreased from last year? You would think that's important, but that's not necessarily important. But what's important on the liabilities is it's staying pace with the increase in assets, because very many times your assets will increase and your liabilities will also increase, but they shouldn't increase at a faster clip. So how do you measure that? Well, we're going to talk about it. The next financial statement is the profit and loss. Sometimes it's referred to as the statement of operations. I go to one thing here, G&A expenses. General and administrative expenses are very much a controllable expense to a captive or captive manager. So what I look for in a comparative view, have the G&A expenses gone up? Might not be a good thing. Or have they gone down? Probably a better thing. And then I look at the revenue. Has the revenue gone up or down? Now, in a comparative view, you're going to want to plug in these calculations. The current year revenue minus last year's revenue divided by last year's revenue. and then you multiply that by 100 to get a percentage. That gives you a year-over-year percentage increase. And you do the same thing with expenses. Okay? Now, when you understand the year-over-year revenue increase or decrease, the SG&A ratio will paint you a pretty compelling story. The SG&A is the general and administrative expenses as listed in the P&L divided by the revenue, and then you'll get a percentage. Well, how do you know if that's a good or bad percentage? Well, what you could do very easily is the public insurance companies have to submit their financial statements to the regulators. You can find within the operating statements SG&A expenses. Okay? So I did that. I compared 5 publicly traded insurance companies, and I compared the SG&A expense ratio. And I've come up with, these are all companies that you know. This company here itemized or lumped them together, operating expenses, commissions, and tax. And that was a 46% expense load. These other 5 insurance companies broke out commission and tax and only lumped in operating expenses. So these are the expense loads of the other 4 companies. And you detect the pattern, 20, 22, 18, 24%, and so on. So if you take the averages of all of these 5, it's 27%. And if you look at your captive SG&A ratio at 17, this captive is rocking on because it's 10% less than the SG&A expense of a commercial carrier. That's a good thing. Now, lastly, footnotes. You got to make sure it's easy to read. If it's not easy to read, walk away. And then I look at the listed SG&A expenses. Travel expense, meeting expense, marketing expense. If the revenues are going up, the G&A expenses may be going up as well. But it shouldn't track more than, say, if the revenue year over year is 12%, this shouldn't track more than 12% either. If it is, you got to ask the question, why? Why is meeting expense up 30% from last year? See what they say. Because G&A expenses are the easiest expense to control. You can't control revenue sometimes by premium, right? It's much harder to control revenue than it is SG&A. So effective captives or their managers really attack G&A. Okay? Hope this was helpful. Next week, we're going to do something special for our visitors to our page. Stay tuned for that. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.